Hello, and welcome to today's Make It Safe Expert Series webinar, Anxiety in Uncertain Times with Dr. Steve Conway. My name is Doris Tommen, and I'm the Services Experience Manager at the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC, and I will be your moderator for today's session. The Fraser Valley office of the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC is located in Chilliwack, on the traditional and unceded territories of the Stalo Coast Salish people. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak to you from these shared lands today. The Manufacturing Safety Alliance is the not-for-profit health and safety association for manufacturers and food processors in BC. Our team of health and safety experts are here to answer your questions and to assist you towards core certification, the occupational safety standard of excellence for manufacturing. We're here to support the continuous improvement of your health and safety programs to prevent injuries and promote workplace wellness. Call on us anytime for health and safety training, information, tools, or advice. And to now for what brought us here today, our hearts and thoughts are with many people impacted by the wildfires around the province. And so today we're hosting this special webinar to help us better understand how anxiety affects our teams in times of crisis. This past week has been so difficult for many individuals and businesses across BC, including some of our own staff. Some have been evacuated, others are on continuous alert for potential evacuation, and still more are worried about their loved ones, friends, and colleagues. So today we've invited Alliance Mental Health and Wellness Director, Dr. Steve Conway, to talk about the anxiety we all face in uncertain times. Steve joined the Alliance last fall, bringing to our team more than 30 years of experience providing mental health services, leadership coaching. He has worked in a wide range of settings with diverse populations and clinical issues, and is available to our member companies as a consultant, advisor, and trainer on workplace mental health topics. Welcome, Steve, for joining me today.
Thanks, Therese. It's nice to be here.
Right. Steve has prepared a few slides for us today to talk about anxiety in times of uncertainty. So let's go through them together.
All right. Thanks, Therese. And again, before we start, I would just like to echo Therese's sentiments about, my heart goes out to everybody who's being affected by this crisis, by these wildfires. And when we think about what's going on here, really, we wanted to emphasize that if you're feeling anxiety, that's a very normal thing to feel under the circumstances. And so feeling worry or like heightened worry, heightened or extreme nervousness, unease, particularly in the face of imminent events or something that we don't have control over the outcome, can be terrifying. And it can create all sorts of unpleasant, stressful emotions and feelings. And we're going to talk more about, what people can expect as we go through these kind of trying times.
Okay. So just a question, Steve, as a manager, supervisor, team leader, how can we recognize anxiety in our team members?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think, before we get to that, I think it's really important to understand like what it is about natural disasters and things like this that really create this heightened level of stress and worry for us. I mean, obviously, for many people, there's the threat to life and safety. There's that uncertainty that we experience. And, as human beings, we really like to believe that we have control over the events in our life. And when things like this happen, it really disrupts our sense of safety, our sense of stability, our sense of structure. We often feel extremely helpless, particularly when, the forces of nature are impacting us in such direct, and powerful ways. We're also just being bombarded with media coverage, which again, it can heighten that sense of worry and anxiety that we have because we're seeing it constantly all the time. And then there's obviously the trauma that occurs when we're experiencing these things. And, there people are experiencing trauma now, but people also can be triggered by past trauma, past experiences. As you know, we've just reached the 20th anniversary of the fires that impacted Kelowna. And anybody who's gone through that or any other similar disaster, is likely going to be feeling increased anxiety as we go through this experience.
Mhm. So then I guess my question is, so what can we do, whether you're an employee or a manager, just like ourselves every day? Like, what can we do to help ourselves and others through anxiety?
So, I mean, that's a really important question. And, I'm going to go into a lot of more detail, but I think the first thing before I go into this, obviously empathy and compassion. People are really, really frightened. People are really anxious. People don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. People don't even know if their homes are standing, or if maybe if loved ones or pets, for example, are safe.
Yeah.
That creates an incredible amount of anxiety. And so, before we kind of talk about what to do about it, I think it's really important to understand what's happening to people. And to help people, we also have to identify what we are experiencing, what the people around us might be experiencing. So we think about anxiety. First of all, you can look around and you'll see that different people respond in different ways, and that can be unsettling for us as well. If I'm somebody who's really, really struggling with this, and I look to a colleague, for example, who doesn't seem to be struggling the way I do, I can actually start to feel, shame potentially, or worry, like, how come I'm not being able to cope with this as well? But it's important to keep in mind that we're all very different. We all have different contexts, different histories. We all have different, our genetics are different. Some people are more hardwired to respond to threat than others. Some people actually respond in ways that appear more calm. We have different personality styles and traits that can actually, make navigating disasters and difficult times. We can be more resilient. Other times we don't have that resilience.
Mhm.
We can learn how to deal with current experiences by our past experiences. Some of us, we've had past experiences and we've learned, well, you know what? I've dealt with something like this before and I know I can survive. Maybe some people have never dealt with anything like this and they don't really know how they respond, which creates more uncertainty. And some people from the past, they might have been through it, but what they learned is, oh my gosh, I don't want to go through this again because the worst things happened to me and I just can't bear it again.
Mhm.
We all have different levels of coping skills, and sometimes we don't really know how we'll respond to a situation until we're in it. So we can be worried, how will I do? And some people seem to be better prepared to manage these things. But
Mhm.
it's really contingent as well on, the support systems around us. Some of us have really healthy support systems, really healthy communities. We know our neighbors. We have people we can call on. If we're more isolated, it makes managing these things more difficult and more frightening. And the resources available to us in our community from our employer, resources externally, but also the inner resources like our own about amount of resilience.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
healthy, being healthy, we cope better. But if we also have health problems and we're facing, an evacuation alert, for example, and we're not sure, can I get my medication? How can I see my doctor? That can lead to different responses. And again, there are cultural and environmental factors. Again, if we're more individualistic, we tend to have this idea that I need to do it by myself. But if we have, around us, we have a vibrant community and support system, we do tend to respond in a much better way. But my point of talking about this is, don't necessarily compare how you're doing as a measure of how other people are doing and vice versa. Everybody will be dealing with these things very differently. And I think that's where compassion, empathy, and patience has to play a huge role.
For sure. For sure. Thanks. I mean, yeah, you've touched on a lot of great things and some coping strategies. I guess again, if you were with someone that you recognize they're experiencing anxiety and you felt that they weren't necessarily managing it well, how what would be the best way to approach them to talk to them about it?
Well, I think, before we even do that, maybe even stepping back a little bit and just being mindful about when people are having a heightened anxiety. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about an anxiety disorder. I'm talking about how we respond, maybe in the short term to crisis situations. And so just being aware, I think the first part, how do we respond is, am I aware of what's going on? Am I aware of how anxiety impacts people. And we know it impacts people in a number of different ways. It impacts us cognitively, so how our mind, our brain functions and how we think. It
Mhm.
impacts emotionally and how we feel. We
Mhm.
definitely impacts us physically and then behaviorally. And so we're just going to go through a few of these just to give people an idea what can be expected for people in heightened anxiety and stress.
Okay, great.
First one, our brain, how we think. When we're in the stress response, we really tend to notice that our brain, our thinking isn't really working the way we're used to. We have a hard time concentrating and focusing. It makes it really hard to do work with detailed tasks and even problem solve effectively. It's very common when we're having this kind of anxiety that our memory isn't really good. We can't recall information, we can't remember it. Our
Right.
brains also, though, they can be very hard on us. When we have anxiety, one of the hallmarks of anxiety is excessive worry and catastrophic thinking. We tell ourselves that the worst possible thing is going to happen with or without evidence to support it. And it's kind of like a tape. It's like a ruminating feedback tape. We just keep on playing it. It can be obsessive and we can't seem to turn it off. Our thoughts can be racing, where we can't, we have so many thoughts kind of stacked up against each other that we can't calm our mind down. And irrational fears, and I want to preface that when we're facing a natural disaster like forest fires, fears around that aren't irrational. But sometimes what can happen is we get fears around other things that can be irrational. Fears that, when we're feeling more calm, we realize, okay, that's not likely to happen. It could be like, you know, things like, you have your go bag, and because your memory is not what it was, you might not grab everything that you thought you needed. And maybe it's something that, a book that you had from 5 years ago that you never read, but now your brain is telling you, oh my gosh, I can't, I don't have that book. I need that book. Right. And that's kind of, it doesn't represent what's really going on, but our mind hooks onto it. It
Mhm.
also makes it really hard to make decisions. It can feel like we're running around, not really knowing what to do. And that's why, with those go bags, it can be very difficult to pack them in the moment because we can't think about what to put in them because our brain is kind of being hijacked by all this fear and anxiety. And we become really hyper aware. We're scanning the environment for danger and threat everywhere. So we just feel really activated all the time. So our brains, cognitively, we really struggle when we're under heightened anxiety and stress.
Mhm. Okay.
It doesn't stop there. There's more. And again, we're human beings. We're a mind-body system. We can't just think things and feel it. Where it's all connected. So in my mind, when I'm surrounded by, frightening events and chaos, emotionally, I'm going to have a response. Obviously, it's really, understandable that I'm going to likely feel an extreme nervousness or tension. Some people, when they're really anxious, and we've probably seen this, they get really irritable, kind of cranky, hard to be around. Other people can display or demonstrate sadness. We can
Mhm.
be hypersensitive, so comments or things that people might say or do that when we're feeling okay don't bother us at all, really get a strong reaction out of us, that people might look at you and go, wow, that was a real overreaction. But keeping in mind that when we're in this kind of stress, in this stress response, that's actually a very common experience. Obviously, many people are going to be feeling extreme fear. When we have that, we can also feel just completely overwhelmed. We can have all these feelings at once. Doesn't mean you're just going to have maybe irritability or sadness or fear. You could have them all, and they can be cycling. So you don't really know how you're doing.
Mhm.
Sense of impending doom, like the worst possible thing is going to happen. That's kind of like the catastrophizing. It can be just a lack of confidence, not feeling like you have the tools to manage the situation. And some of us, as just a way of coping, we kind of detach. So we kind of numb out. We kind of don't really feel present in our own skin, so to speak.
Mhm.
But emotions are also tied to our physiology, right? And so it's very common when we're in the stress response or a heightened anxiety response that your body is going to respond in certain ways. The first one many people realize is they get heart palpitations. It feels like their heart is just flitter fluttering or pounding really fast. We can have a shortness of breath. It's hard to get a deep breath. We can sweat more than normal. It's very common to tremble or shake. Many people who are going through extreme stress or anxiety have a lot of muscle tension. You can feel pain in your muscles because you're just kind of walking around like, oh, everything's tight, which for many people can lead to headaches. I mean, when I know I get really anxious or worried, one of the first things that happens to me is I get tension headaches. Very, very common for people to have stomach problems, to have irritable bowel issues, for example, or not being hungry or nauseated. Very common. And because we're probably not sleeping or we're just so keyed up all the time, we can feel extra tired. And we know that when we don't get enough sleep, that also has an impact on how we feel and how we think. And some people can be just dizzy. So there's a range of things that we can experience. But I will say, if you are experiencing these things, don't just assume, well, I went to this webinar and this guy named Steve said this is a guide. This could also be indicative of a serious health problem, a physical health issue. So if you're noticing these things, don't take an unnecessary risk. Get it checked out. Get it checked out by a doctor or a GP.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're under extreme stress, it has an impact on what we do, our behavior. One of the more common ones is our sleep goes out the window. It's really hard to sleep when we're in the stress response, when we're anxious and scared, right? It's actually, it's kind of like an antidote to sleep. It really keeps us awake. And when we're not sleeping, it's hard to think properly. We don't feel emotionally as good, and physically we don't feel as good.
But can it be the opposite? Like if you're feeling really anxious, maybe you want to just sleep to escape?
Some people can, and particularly if they start feeling excessively sad or
Yeah.
hopeless or helpless, sleep
Yeah.
can kind of be a default for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
A common thing that people do is also we kind of like to avoid, right? And all these things are really kind of, nature has designed us to be this way. So we try to avoid it. We can't look at it. We want to avoid anything that reminds of the thing that is causing us fear. We can also be very compulsive in our behavior, right? Like if you've had to leave your home and you can't remember, did I lock my door? I can't remember if I locked my door. You keep checking your door or you keep checking your phone, right? And you can't seem to stop. When we're overwhelmed, another thing that is very common is we start to procrastinate. That's because there's just so much coming on and so much hitting us that our brain kind of freezes up and we don't know where to start. So again, we can feel irritable, but we can also behave irritably with other people, which doesn't really help the situation at all. We can be hypervigilant, right? Again, it's that behavior of it goes along with how we're scanning for danger all the time. We're worried all the time and we're scanning, always scanning. It's like your head's on a pivot looking for things that are going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We can want excessive reassurance, and often with, if we have children, this is very common. Children can actually be seen to sometimes act younger than their age, right? And that's when parents really need to, again, stay calm and reassure their children that everything's going to be good and that they're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Substance use is a common reaction as well, and that kind of goes along with avoidance. When we're feeling really tight and on edge, a lot of people have learned that substances actually can, have an impact on that. I would say that, we have to be very careful with the use of substances because it can impair our thinking and our decision making. And then we can just be restless, just can't sit still, just very tense and activated all the time. So those are the cluster of more common symptoms that people can experience when they're feeling heightened anxiety. Doesn't mean you will have many people have all of them. Some people will notice some more in their cognitive or their physical or their emotional or their behavioral. Some people have few and some people have a lot. So again, we're all very different. So paying attention to ourselves, paying attention to the people around us, if your family members, your friends, if I'm a manager or a leader, being mindful about how the people on my team are reacting, as a colleague to my coworkers, am I paying attention to how they're doing? This is the first step in knowing, okay, so what can I do about this, right? And you mentioned before, Doris, about, what are the kind of coping strategies that we can do for ourselves and for the people around us.
Mhm.
You know, and again, nothing's a silver bullet, right? There's no way, you can't do just one of these things and it's going to, you know, be guaranteed. Sometimes we have to try a few things, and sometimes, you know, what works for one person might not work for others. But a lot of these have been shown to be very effective.
Okay.
So sleep. Now, Doris, how is your sleep lately? Are you getting enough?
I am sleeping actually pretty decent right
Good.
now. Definitely some of the things that you mentioned definitely resonated with me, that I have felt them or my family has felt them. And I'm sure even people joining us have felt
Mhm.
them. So,
Mhm.
I guess as we think about that, can you share some resources that our members can use and, or share to find additional healthy coping strategies?
Yeah, yeah. And once I'm done, you know, I'll kind of go over these, and I'll talk
Okay.
about a few of them, right? So
Sure.
obviously, and this is going to be hard. And people often say, "You expect me to get sleep when I feel like this?" Yeah, yeah, it
Um,
is hard to do. But you know, when we make efforts to do that, even you know, getting some shut eye, just making sure we have some downtime to rest is extremely important, because when we're not getting enough sleep, again, it can exacerbate or make our anxiety even worse. So to the extent that you can, focus on your getting some sleep or rest. We often, when we're under a lot of stress, we often, our nutrition doesn't, we don't do as well. Maybe we're not eating at all. You know, maybe we're not getting enough water because we're so distracted we don't think about it. But remember, our body requires fuel to function. And so if I'm not putting healthy fuel in, you know, for example, my brain doesn't work as effectively. I can't cope as effectively. You know, it's like, you know, we all kind of probably have memories or experiences when, you know, you haven't had enough food and your mood alters. You become more irritable,
angry.
angry. We all turn into Steve Buscemi's all of a sudden, right?
Mhm.
So to the extent possible, remind yourself to eat healthy foods and drink lots of water, right? And I'm emphasizing water here because water is extremely healthy for us. Now, exercise is important if you can do it in a place that's safe. If there's a smoke alert, if you have, you know, smoke and particulates in the environment that are really high, you obviously don't want to be moving around out there. But if you can go to a place that's air conditioned, where there's ventilated, exercise, we know really helps. And for those of us who might not be in the vicinity of the fires, but we're worried about people who maybe are, and you know, and it's safe to do so, exercise can be extremely helpful. You know, research has shown that exercise, if we're, you know, if we have mild to moderate, you know, anxiety, depression, exercise can be as effective as therapy and medication combined. It is that helpful. So just move if you can. Limit your substance use. You'll notice I'm not saying, you know, eradicate it. I'm just saying be very, very careful about what you put into your system. You know, in many ways, you know, substances to anxiety or stress or mental health concerns is like salt. It's like salt water to thirst. It feels like something wet's going in there, but all it's doing is making you thirstier. Substances can have the same impact. And be particularly mindful, again, with caffeine, particularly if you think I got to stay up, that caffeine, that will also heighten your experience of your physical symptoms of anxiety and your racing thoughts. To the extent you can, slow it down. Practice relaxation techniques. Breathe. One thing that you'll probably notice from yourself or others, if you're really anxious, you're probably not breathing or not breathing much, very shallow. You know, and breath is an interesting thing. It's amazing what happens when we breathe. Breathing keeps us alive. And if we're actually breathing and stopping it and slowing it down, that can actually induce a sense of calm. So we can't be anxious and calm at the same time. You can try it, it won't work. So practice relaxation techniques. Do some deep breathing, for example. You know, progressive muscle relaxation, where you tighten all your muscle groups and release them. You know, if you're a meditator, try that. There's some wonderful apps on your phone that you can do really short mini mindfulness exercises, like a minute to 5 minutes long. Just do them periodically, and it can really help.
Mm.
It
Okay.
also, yeah, I mean, again, it's not a silver bullet. And and it can be really hard to do when our mind is racing, right? And the
Right.
idea is not to, you know, try and turn off your mind. It's just to focus on your breath. Because when our mind is racing, we're having a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of catastrophizing is going on. Some of it might be reasonable, but a lot of it really isn't. And so we got to step back and go, okay, how likely is this? Is this really a likely outcome? Is there a different way of seeing this? Like if you say, oh my goodness, you keep thinking, oh, there's nothing I can do. I'm so powerless. If you can breathe, calm yourself down and step back from that thought and go, well, am I really powerless? What are the resources I have? It might not be all the resources you want, but there's probably something. Be helped by just, sometimes we have so much going on in our head. Just the act of writing it out can be really cathartic. Just get it out, right? You don't have to read it ever again. You don't have to share it. Just the act of getting it out.
Right.
I'm a big believer in social support. You know, as a species, we evolved together. We wouldn't have been here if we were all individuals. So if we have a social support network that we can reach out to, it's very helpful. If you're worried about somebody, rather than just worry about it, reach out. I have friends who live in Yellowknife, and I was listening to the news. It's been a while since I contacted them, and I just thought I need to know how they're doing. And they were just in a gas station for an hour, getting ready to evacuate, and they did evacuate, and we kept in touch. That probably helped them, but it also helped me in terms of just steadying my worry about how they might be doing. So get to know people, rely on each other. Don't go it alone. It can be very helpful to help others. Sometimes when we're feeling, helpless, the best thing we can do is, how can I pitch in to help others in a way that's safe, right? We want to be careful to do it in a way that's safe.
Yeah.
Media, I think it's important to stay up to date with what's going on, but we can get bombarded with so much media about what's going on that it can be overwhelming, right? The idea of doom scrolling, where you're looking through your phone at all the worst stories, that might make you feel like you're being informed, but really kind of what happened is, you see one event, you see it first thing in the morning, and then you check your phone all day long. So that one event, you've seen it dozens of times. It's been on the radio dozens of times. It's been on the news on TV dozens of times. And before you know it, our perception of what's going on can get magnified and warped. We think this one thing is much bigger than it is. So limit it, right? Check it periodically and be sure that you're checking, credible sources of information. Those go bags, be prepared. It's preparation and prevention can do a lot just to calm us down. If I know that I've got what I need waiting for me, if I know I have my information, my documents, I have what I need to be able to leave, I sleep better at night, right? It's better than running around at the last minute trying to do this. It's going to be hard.
Yeah, for sure.
There are resources, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of them. Be aware of what they are, right? Again, this is kind of like, being pre-warned and being prepared. Where can I get the help that I need? Where can I get the information I need? Do I have people on my phone that I can call readily? And for some people, it's so overwhelming. Seek that professional help. There is help out there. There are places you can go to get assistance, because we can't always do it by ourselves. And if we're really struggling, or we have a history of mental health concerns, all these can be really exacerbated. So reach out. It's probably the best thing that we can do for ourselves and others, and encourage the people that we know to do these things as well, right? Or at least some of them.
For sure. Wow. Well, thanks, Steve. That's great, and very helpful. So thank you for your time today, and just talking through with us about anxiety in uncertain times. And there's a lot of takeaways here, and I hope everyone was able to glean something from our chat today. If you would like to reach out to Steve directly for more information, or to support you in how to integrate mental health supports into your health and safety program, you can reach him directly. And remember, you can visit us online anytime for help, or to access our full library of webinars, resources, and training. And you can also call us directly. Any one of our advisors are here to assist you and can also connect you with Steve. So once again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Our thoughts are with you, and we definitely want and wish you all to stay safe.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.